The Shadow Maw raised its massive claws above Sora, who pressed herself against the cliff face with tears streaming down her tentacled face. The young Aquarian had studied dangerous creatures her entire life but had never imagined anything like this nightmare that stood before her. The beast seemed to be enjoying her terror, as it drew out the moment before striking the killing blow. The other hunters watched in frozen horror, as their weapons lay useless around them and their legendary skills proved worthless against this apex predator. Yuki tried once more to activate her targeting systems, but her crystal body was cracked from being thrown against a tree. Hana floated helplessly in her damaged water suit, while Roku and his warriors struggled to stand after being scattered like leaves in a storm. Then something happened that none of them would ever forget for the rest of their very long lives. Minho moved. The quiet human who had been dismissed as the weakest member of their group suddenly exploded into motion with a speed that made even Jinwoo look slow. But this was not the calculated movement of a trained warrior or the enhanced reflexes of an augmented hunter. This was something far more primitive and terrifying than anything the civilized galaxy had seen in thousands of years. Minho did not reach for a weapon or call out to his companions or try to coordinate a rescue attempt. Instead, he did something that violated every rule of civilized behavior that the galaxy's advanced species lived by. He charged directly at the apex predator with nothing but his bare hands and a look in his eyes that made the watching aliens step back and unconscious. Fear. The Shadow Maw turned toward this new threat with what might have been surprise, if creatures like it were capable of such emotions. Here was a being that should have been running away or cowering in terror, but instead was attacking something 10 times its size with what appeared to be complete confidence in victory. What happened next challenged everything the alien hunters thought they knew about physics, biology, and the nature of predator and prey. Relationships throughout the universe. Minho reached the beast before it could fully turn to face him, and leaped onto its massive foreleg with movements that seemed to defy gravity itself. His hands found purchase in the creature's midnight fur, and he began to climb toward its head with determination that bordered on madness. The watching aliens saw muscles bulge and strain in ways that contradicted every medical scan they had ever conducted on human physiology. The Shadow Maw roared with anger and tried to shake off this unexpected attacker, but found that the human was holding on with grip strength that should not have been possible for such a small creature. Minho climbed higher on the beast's body while it thrashed and spun in circles, trying to dislodge him. His fingers dug into the creature's hide with force that left deep gouges in what was supposed to be impenetrable armor. The most terrifying thing for the watching aliens was not that Minho was fighting the apex predator, it was that he seemed to know exactly what he was doing. Every movement was calculated not for efficiency or elegance but for maximum damage to his opponent. He struck at nerve clusters and pressure points with knowledge that suggested his species had spent millions of years learning how to kill things that were bigger and stronger than themselves. The shadow tried to slam itself against the cliff wall to crush the human, but Minho rolled away from the impact at the last second and immediately resumed his attack. He wrapped his arms around the creature's massive neck and began to squeeze with strength that seemed to come from somewhere deeper than muscle and bone. His face showed no fear or doubt, only the focused concentration of a predator that had found worthy prey. The alien hunters watched in growing horror, as they realized that evolution had not made humans weak or helpless. Instead, it had created something that was far more dangerous than any of them had imagined possible. This was not the behavior of a civilized being using tools and technology to overcome natural limitations. This was the behavior of something that had climbed to the top of its world's food chain through pure savage determination. Yuk tried to process what she was seeing through her analytical mind, but found that her computers could not calculate the forces involved in what the human was doing. Her targeting systems kept insisting that what she was watching was impossible according to everything known about human biology and physics in general. Hana's scientific instruments were recording data that made no sense at all. The human's body temperature was rising to levels that should have been fatal, while his heart rate remained steady and controlled. His muscles were generating power outputs that exceeded the theoretical maximum for his species by factors that her computers could not even display properly. The Shadow Maw began to show something that none of the hunters had ever seen before in an apex predator. It began to show fear. The creature that had terrorized entire star systems was being dominated by something a fraction of its size that refused to let go, no matter how much damage it took. Deep cuts covered Minho's arms and back where the beast's claws had found their mark, but he showed no sign of pain or weakness. The human's grip on the creature's neck tightened with mechanical precision, while his legs wrapped around its torso like steel cables. The Shadow Maw's roars became weaker and more desperate as its air supply was slowly cut off by an opponent that seemed immune to exhaustion or injury. Roku and his warriors had seen battles across dozens of worlds, but nothing had prepared them for watching a maintenance worker from a backwater planet systematically strangle the galaxy's most feared predator with his bare hands. The sight challenged their fundamental understanding of what it meant to be strong or dangerous or apex anything. The battle was far from over, but something had shifted in the forest around them. The Shadow Maw was no longer the undisputed master of its territory. Something older and more primitive had entered its domain and was teaching it what it meant to be prey instead of predator. The galaxy was about to learn why humans had never developed natural armor or poison or enhanced speed. They had never needed those things because evolution had given them something far more effective. It had given them the absolute refusal to give up no matter how hopeless the situation appeared to be. The aftermath of the battle left the alien hunting party in a state of shock that went beyond anything they had experienced in their long lives of facing dangerous creatures across the galaxy. Minho stood in the center of the clearing, surrounded by the remains of what had once been the most feared apex predator in known space. His chest rose and fell with exhaustion, but his eyes still held that terrible gleam that none of them would ever be able to forget. The shadow maw lay in pieces. Around him, its legendary hide, torn apart by nothing more than human hands and a will to survive that had proven stronger than claws that could cut through starship armor. The creature that had killed hundreds of the galaxy's best hunters had been dismantled by a maintenance worker who was not even supposed to be on this expedition in the first place. That Sora, the young Aquarian who had been moments away from death, floated toward her savior with movements that showed both gratitude and terror in equal measure. She had studied dangerous predators her entire life, but had never imagined that the most dangerous predator in the galaxy might be standing right next to her, wearing the simple work clothes of a starship maintenance crew. The other hunters maintained their distance as they tried to process what they had witnessed. They no longer saw Minho as the weak link in their group or as someone who had been included by mistake. They saw him as something far more dangerous than they had ever imagined possible, and they were not sure how they should react to that knowledge. Roku approached the human with the careful movements of someone who was no longer certain about his place in the galaxy's hierarchy of predators. The massive Krillian had conquered star systems through pure physical strength, but what he had just witnessed made him question whether his people were actually as strong as they had always believed themselves to be. Word of the incident began to spread through the galaxy's communication networks before the hunting party had even left the planet's surface. The footage captured by their recording devices became the most watched piece of media in galactic history as billions of beings across thousands of worlds tried to understand how a species they had dismissed as physically unremarkable could produce such a display of raw power and determination. Xenobiologists struggled to explain the humans' performance using known science and found that their theories broke down when confronted with the reality of what Minho had accomplished. Research teams were assembled on dozens of worlds to study the footage frame by frame, looking for some explanation that would fit within their understanding of how the universe was supposed to work. The economic implications were staggering beyond belief. The Shadow Maw's remains now belonged to Minho by right of conquest and represented wealth that exceeded the gross domestic product of most civilized worlds. But more importantly, the demonstration of human capabilities sent shockwaves through galactic politics that would reshape the balance of power for generations to come. Trade negotiations with Earth suddenly took on new urgency as species that had previously dismissed humanity as irrelevant began to reconsider their positions. Military alliances were quietly restructured as governments realized that they might have been underestimating a potential threat that had been hiding in plain sight all along. Tourist warnings were issued for human-controlled space, not because humans were considered hostile, but because no one was certain what other capabilities they might be hiding beneath their civilized exterior. The Galactic Travel Advisory Board recommended that visitors to Earth should avoid any activities that might trigger the same response they had witnessed on Kel-Tahara. As news of the battle spread across the galaxy, other stories began to emerge from the archives of various species. Reports of human explorers surviving in environments that should have killed them within minutes. Accounts of human traders walking away from business deals that would have bankrupted other species while somehow coming out ahead. Whispers of human military units accomplishing impossible missions through methods that their allies preferred not to discuss in detail. The galaxy began to realize that they had been making a fundamental error in their assessment of this young species. Humans were not just another civilization that had been lucky enough to stumble into space travel. They were the descendants of the apex predators of a world so dangerous that it had forged them into something that could tear apart the galaxy's most feared creatures with their bare hands. The hunting party's official report became required reading in xenobiology courses across civilized space. The phrase "never corner a human" entered common usage in 17 different languages and became part of the standard diplomatic protocols used when dealing with Earth's representatives. Research into human evolution revealed the terrifying truth about their homeworld. Earth was classified as a Class 12 death world, where the atmospheric composition alone should have prevented the development of complex life. The fact that humans had not just survived but had thrived in such an environment suggested capabilities that went far beyond what anyone had previously imagined. The final scene of this galactic revelation took place in homes across thousands of worlds as alien parents began telling their children new bedtime stories. These were not the comfortable fairy tales of previous generations, but cautionary tales about the species that could kill monsters with their bare hands and the importance of never underestimating something just because it looked harmless. On distant worlds, where beings that considered themselves the ultimate predators had ruled for millions of years, children now learned to check under their beds for humans. The galaxy had discovered that sometimes the most dangerous hunter is the one that does not look dangerous at all. Minho returned to his quiet life as a maintenance worker, but the universe had changed around him forever. Humanity was no longer seen as a minor species that had gotten lucky. They were recognized as something far more ancient and terrifying than anyone had realized. They were the children of a death world that had taught them the most important lesson in the galaxy: never give up, no matter how impossible the odds might seem, because somewhere in the darkness there is always something bigger and stronger that thinks you would make an easy meal. And when that moment comes, the only thing that matters is whether you have the will to prove them wrong. The galaxy had learned to fear, and that fear would reshape the stars themselves. The battle between human and beasts reached a level of violence that made the watching aliens question everything they thought they knew about the nature of life in the universe. Minho had managed to maintain his stranglehold on the neck despite the creature's increasingly desperate attempts to shake him loose. His arms had locked around the beast's throat like a mechanical vice that tightened with every breath the creature tried to take. The Shadow Maw was not finished fighting. In a move that showed why it had survived as the apex predator of its world for so many years, it threw itself backward toward the cliff face with enough force to shatter stone. The impact when they hit the rock wall sent shockwaves through the ground that knocked the alien hunters off their feet and created a crater in the cliff that would be visible from orbit. When the dust and debris settled, both combatants were still moving, but something had changed in the dynamic of their fight. The Shadow Maw staggered on unsteady legs, with its breathing labored and desperate, while Minho slid down its back, leaving a trail of blood from wounds that would have killed most beings. But instead of showing any sign of the pain that should have been overwhelming him, the human's eyes held something that made even the battle hardened. Alien warriors stepped back in primitive fear. It was the look of a predator that had tasted blood and found it good. What happened next would be studied and debated in xenobiology research centers across the galaxy for generations to come. Minho did not try to use tools or weapons or any of the technological advantages that defined civilized species throughout known space. Instead, he relied on something that evolution had burned into humanity's genetic code during millions of years of fighting their way to the top of Earth's food chain. He became something that the galaxy's sophisticated species had forgotten could exist. He became a persistence hunter driven by instincts that were older than civilization itself. The human began to stalk the wounded Shadow Maw with patience that seemed to stretch into infinity. Every time the creature tried to flee into the forest, Minho cut off its escape route with movements that anticipated where it would go before it knew itself. Every time the beast tried to hide among the trees or rocks, he tracked it down using senses that should not have been that acute in a species that was supposed to be civilized. The Shadow Maw, which had terrorized entire star systems and killed hundreds of the galaxy's best hunters, began to experience something it had never felt before in its entire existence. It began to feel genuine terror. It was being hunted by something that refused to give up, refused to be deterred by pain or exhaustion, and refused to acknowledge that it should be outmatched by a creature 10 times its size. The alien hunters followed at a safe distance as this impossible chase continued through the red forests of Kelth. They watched Minho track the beast across terrain that should have been impossible for a human to navigate, while blood loss and injuries that would have killed any of them seemed to have no effect on his performance at all. YUKI tried to understand what she was seeing through her analytical mind, but her computers kept producing error messages when she tried to calculate the human's capabilities. According to every scientific model her people had developed, Minho should have been dead within minutes of starting his fight with the Shadow. Instead, he seemed to be getting stronger as the battle continued. Hannah's instruments detected chemical changes in the human's body that made no sense according to known biology. His bloodstream was flooded with compounds that her species used only in their most advanced combat stims, but his body was producing them naturally in response to the stress of battle. His muscle fibers were operating at efficiency levels that exceeded theoretical maxims, while his nervous system processed information faster than her people's best computers. The chase continued for hours, across landscapes that would have exhausted the alien hunters within minutes. The Shadow Maw left a trail of blood and broken vegetation as it tried desperately to escape from its relentless pursuer. But no matter how far it ran or how cleverly it tried to hide, Minho was always there waiting for it with that terrible patient hunger in his eyes. As the alien sun began to set, the wounded beast made one final desperate stand in a clearing surrounded by the twisted trees that gave this forest its reputation for danger. The Shadow Maw turned to face its tormentor with the fury of a creature that had decided it would rather die fighting than continue to run from something that should have been easy prey. The final confrontation began when the beast charged across the clearing with the last of its strength behind claws that could still cut through starship armor. Minho did not dodge or try to get out of the way. Instead, he did something that would be whispered about in horror across 1,000 worlds for centuries to come. He caught the creature's claws in his bare hands. The impact drove his feet deep into the earth, creating trenches as he absorbed the force of 1,200 pounds of furious apex predator. His muscles strained and bulged as he held the beast's weapons away from his body while its momentum carried them both across the clearing. The sound of the collision was like thunder rolling across the landscape. For a moment that seemed to last forever, the human and the beast were locked together in a test of pure strength against pure strength. The Shadow Maw pushed forward with everything it had left, while Minho held his ground with determination that seemed to draw power from some source beyond physical reality. Then slowly and inexorably the human began to push back. The watching aliens saw Minho's grip shift on the creature's claws and realized with growing horror that he was not just holding the beast at bay. He was beginning to twist its weapons against their owner with movements that spoke of knowledge gained through millions of years of killing things that were bigger and more dangerous than his ancestors had any right to survive against. The roar of pain and rage echoed across the forest as the human began to systematically destroy the creature that had been the terror of entire star systems. There were no words to describe what the alien hunters witnessed in that clearing, as something from humanity's deepest genetic memory took control and showed the galaxy what it meant to be the apex predator of a death world. The first sign that something was terribly wrong came when Jinwoo returned from his morning patrol run with fear written across his normally confident face. The Zephyrian scout had circled their entire camp 3 times at speeds that would have made him invisible to most creatures, but what he found made his blood run cold in his veins. Every single perimeter sensor they had placed the night before was gone. Not destroyed by crude force or torn apart by wild animals, but removed with surgical precision that spoke of intelligence far beyond what they had expected from any creature on this world. Someone or something had studied their defensive systems during the night and figured out exactly how to disable them without triggering a single alarm. Yuk. I examined the locations where their sensors had been placed and found cuts in the metal mounting posts that were so clean they looked like they had been made with industrial cutting tools. Her crystalline fingers traced the edges of the cuts while her analytical mind tried to process what kind of creature could have made such precise marks. The answer she came up with made her wish she had stayed home on her safe crystal world. Hannah floated around the camp checking her specially designed motion detectors and found that they had recorded movement throughout the entire night. But the readings made no sense at all. Something large had been circling their camp for hours, moving in patterns that suggested it was studying them, learning their habits and identifying their weaknesses. The creature had never come close enough to trigger their alarms, but had maintained perfect surveillance of everything they did. You gathered the hunting party together as the alien sun climbed higher in the red sky. His massive Krillian frame cast a long shadow over the group as he explained what their situation meant. They were no longer the hunters on this expedition. They had become the prey of something that was smart enough to turn their own tactics against them. The expedition members tried to maintain their confidence by talking about all the dangerous creatures they had faced before, but everyone could hear the uncertainty creeping into their voices. Yuki mentioned that her people had sensors that could track anything that moved, but those sensors were now lying in pieces somewhere in the forest. Hannah talked about traps that could catch creatures they could not even see, but her traps required the sensors that were no longer working. Minho continued his quiet work maintaining their equipment and seemed to be the only member of the group who was not affected by the growing tension. He hummed softly while he checked their power cells and cleaned their communication devices. When Roku asked if he had any thoughts about their situation, he just shrugged and said that something big had been walking around their camp, but that was probably normal for a place like this. The other hunters stared at him with mixtures of disbelief and irritation. How could this simple human be so calm when they were obviously being stalked by the most dangerous predator in known space? Did he not understand that they were all probably going to die horrible deaths before the day was over? The answer to that question came sooner than any of them expected. They were eating their morning meal and discussing their next move when the forest around them suddenly went completely silent. Every sound that had been part of the background noise since they arrived simply stopped as if someone had thrown a switch. The hunters looked at each other with growing alarm as they realized that this was not the same kind of silence they had experienced the night before. This silence felt different. It felt like the moment before something terrible happens, when the entire world holds its breath and waits for disaster to strike. Even the alien wind seemed to stop blowing, as if the planet itself was afraid of what was about to occur. The attack came without any warning at all. The Shadow Maw burst from the undergrowth with speed that defied belief, moving like liquid darkness given form and purpose. The creature was even larger than the reports had suggested, with a body that seemed to absorb the red sunlight and eyes that glowed like dying stars. Its mouth opened to reveal rows of teeth that looked more like obsidian daggers than anything that belonged in a living creature. The hunting party scattered in all directions as their carefully planned formation crumbled under the reality of facing something that moved like a force of nature. Yuki tried to bring her targeting systems online, but found that her supposedly perfect aim meant nothing when her target seemed to be everywhere at once. Her crystal body flashed with emergency lights as she struggled to track something that moved too fast for her enhanced reflexes. Hannah deployed her most advanced traps, but the Shadow Maw flowed around them like water flowing around rocks. Her technological masterpieces that had captured creatures from across the galaxy activated too slowly to catch something that moved like it was not bound by the same physical laws that governed everything else in the universe. Roku and the other Krillian warriors tried to form a battle line, using their legendary strength and natural armor, but the beast tore through them like they were made of paper. Their weapons that could punch holes through starship hulls could not even track fast enough to hit their target. The creature knocked them aside with casual swipes of its massive paws, sending warriors who had conquered star systems flying through the air like broken toys. Jinwoo tried to use his incredible speed to stay ahead of the beast, but found that he was actually slower than the creature he was trying to escape. The Shadowmoor seemed to be playing with him, allowing him to think. He was getting away before appearing right in front of him with what looked almost like amusement in its glowing eyes, in the chaos and terror of the attack. Sora, the youngest member of their expedition, became separated from the others. The Aquarian xenobiologist who had joined the hunt to study alien life forms found herself trapped against a cliff face with nowhere to run and no weapons that could possibly stop the nightmare that was approaching her. The Shadowmoor stalked toward her with deliberate slowness, as if it wanted to savor the fear it was creating. Its massive head tilted to one side as it studied this new type of prey with what appeared to be scientific curiosity. The creature seemed to be in no hurry to finish what it had started, and appeared to be enjoying the terror it was causing. Sora called out for help, but her companions were too busy trying to survive their own encounters with death to come to her aid. The beast raised one enormous paw with claws that extended like sword blades, while its mouth opened in what might have been a smile if smiles could contain that much malice and hunger. The other hunters watched in horror as they realized that all their advanced technology and legendary skills meant nothing against a creature that had evolved to be the perfect killer. This was the moment when they truly understood the difference between hunting dangerous prey and facing an apex predator that had never known defeat. The Shadowmoor prepared to claim its first victim, while the greatest hunters in the galaxy stood helpless to prevent it. The red sky of planet Kelthera burned like fire above the alien hunters who had gathered from across the galaxy for the most dangerous hunt ever attempted. Ships from dozens of different worlds sat scattered across the landing field, their strange shapes casting weird shadows in the crimson light. Each vessel carried warriors and hunters who believed they were the best killers their species had ever produced. Yuki stood near the central meeting area, checking her crystal skin for any cracks that might slow her down during the hunt. Her people, the Vorthons, were famous throughout the galaxy for their perfect aim and cold, calculating minds. She had killed creatures on 17 different worlds and never missed a target that mattered. Her blue crystalline body reflected the red sunlight in patterns that hurt to look at directly. Not far from her, Hannah floated in a special water suit that kept her tentacles moist and flexible. The Aquarian engineer had designed traps and weapons that other species could barely understand. Her people lived in the deep oceans of their homeworld, where they had learned to think in ways that land-dwelling creatures found impossible to follow. She had captured living nightmares that most beings thought were just scary stories told to children. The gathering also included members of other powerful species. Roku, the expedition leader, was a massive Krillian whose people grew natural armor plates and stood nearly 9 feet tall. His species had conquered 12 star systems through pure physical strength and had never met a creature they could not kill in direct combat. Jinwoo was a Zephyrian scout whose people could move so fast that most other species saw them as nothing more than blurs of motion. Then there was the human. Minho sat quietly on a supplier crate near the edge of the group, looking completely out of place among these legendary hunters. He wore simple work clothes that looked like they had seen better days and carried tools for maintaining equipment rather than weapons for killing dangerous prey. The other hunters had wondered why this unremarkable creature had been included in their elite group. The truth was that Minho was only there because of a mistake in the galactic bureaucracy. Someone had mixed up his application for a maintenance job with an application from a famous human big game hunter who had the same first name. By the time anyone realized the error, the expedition was already underway, and it seemed easier to just let him come along as their equipment specialist. Roku called the group together as the alien sun began to set, painting the sky in deeper shades of red and purple. His voice boomed across the camp with the authority of someone who had led successful hunts on the most dangerous worlds in known space. The target they had come to hunt was called the Shadowmoor, and it was unlike anything any of them had ever faced before. The creature stood 12 feet tall at the shoulder and measured nearly 20 feet from nose to tail. Its body was covered in fur so black that it seemed to absorb light itself, making it nearly invisible in shadows. The beast had claws that could cut through starship armor and teeth that could bite through solid steel, like it was soft cheese. But the most terrifying thing about the Shadowmoor was not its size or its weapons. It was its intelligence. The creature had been studied by the best xenobiologists in the galaxy, and they all agreed that it was smart enough to set traps, plan ambushes, and even use simple tools when it needed to. Some researchers believed it was actually smarter than most of the species that considered themselves civilized. The Shadowmoor had killed over 300 hunters in the past 50 years. Entire expeditions had vanished without sending so much as a single distress signal. The few survivors who had encountered the beast and lived to tell about it all described the same thing. The creature did not just kill for food or territory. It seemed to enjoy the hunt itself and would often play with its prey before finishing them off at ROK. You explained that the beast they were hunting was particularly dangerous because it had claimed a territory that included the ruins of an ancient city. The ruins were filled with valuable artifacts that could make anyone rich beyond imagination, but no one had been able to reach them because the Shadowmaw killed anyone who tried to get close. The reward for killing this particular Shadowmaw was enormous. The Galactic Council had offered enough credits to buy entire planets, plus the rights to keep whatever artifacts could be recovered from the ruins. The creature's hide alone was worth more than most people would see in 100 lifetimes, because it could be used to make armor that was nearly indestructible. As Roku talked about their prey, the other hunters shared stories of their own greatest victories. Yuki described tracking a void whale through empty space for 3 months, using nothing but math and determination. Hannah told them about designing a trap that caught an entire swarm of metal-eating nanobots that had been destroying spacecraft throughout their sector of space. Each story was more impressive than the last, and showed why these beings were considered the best hunters their species had ever produced. They had killed creatures that most people thought were impossible to defeat, and had survived in places where even thinking beings feared to tread. Minho listened to all of this without saying much of anything. When the others asked about his greatest hunt, he just shrugged and said he had once fixed a broken air recycler on a mining station before everyone suffocated. The other hunters laughed, thinking he was making a joke, but he seemed completely serious. That as night fell over the alien landscape, the expedition members set up their equipment and prepared for what they all knew would be the most dangerous hunt of their lives. Advanced sensors were placed around their camp to warn them if anything large approached. Energy barriers were activated to keep out smaller predators. Weapons were checked and rechecked to make sure they would work when needed. The forest around them was full of strange sounds that none of them recognized. Things howled and screamed in the darkness, while other creatures made clicking noises that seemed to come from all directions at once. The very air seemed to vibrate with the presence of unseen predators that were watching the hunters and deciding whether they looked like easy prey. But the most disturbing thing was the silence that would fall suddenly and completely over the entire area. During these moments of absolute quiet, every member of the expedition felt like they were being watched by something that was deciding whether or not to kill them. The silence would last for exactly 37 seconds each time, and then the forest sounds would start again as if nothing had happened. Minho spent his evening maintaining their equipment and seemed completely unbothered by the scary atmosphere that had everyone else on edge. He hummed quietly to himself while he worked and occasionally asked simple questions about the local wildlife that made the other hunters exchange glances and shake their heads. None of them realized that they were about to learn something about humans that would change how the entire galaxy thought about Earth and its people forever.